The art of becoming invisible. Hashtag part 1. The summons. Nathan Brooks had spent 21 years mastering the art of reading silences. Not the comfortable quiet of concentration, but the loaded, meaningful silences that preceded career-altering conversations. The kind that settled over hallways when certain names were mentioned or filled conference rooms before difficult announcements. In corporate America, silence was its own language, and Nathan had become fluent through decades of careful observation. He'd learned which conversations stopped when he approached the break room. He'd memorized the subtle differences between a colleague's genuine smile and the manufactured one they wore before delivering unwelcome news. He developed an almost preternatural ability to decode the subtext buried in brief, carefully worded emails. So when his phone buzzed at 11:47 on a Tuesday morning, not Monday, which would have been predictable, not Friday, which would have been merciful, but Tuesday, that peculiar purgatory in the middle of the work week, Nathan knew immediately that his life was about to change. The message was brief, almost aggressively so. "Nathan, come to my office. We need to talk." Elena Ross, CEO. 11 words. No context, no preparation, no cushioning pleasantries. Just a summons. Nathan stared at his company-issued laptop screen, the cursor blinking steadily against a quarterly review spreadsheet that suddenly felt irrelevant. Around him, the open-plan office hummed with its usual Tuesday rhythms. Keyboards clicked in syncopated patterns. The coffee machine in the break room gurgled through another brewing cycle. Someone from marketing, Jessica, probably, laughed too loudly at a joke that likely wasn't that funny. Normal sounds. Ordinary Tuesday sounds. The sounds of a world that kept spinning while yours ground to a halt. Nathan saved his work automatically, a habit so deeply ingrained that his fingers moved without conscious thought. His reflection caught in the darkened screen of his monitor as the spreadsheet disappeared. A 46-year-old man in a button-down shirt he'd ironed himself that morning while his daughter Maya complained about her AP history teacher over breakfast. Brown hair graying at the temples. Lines around his eyes that hadn't been there when he'd started at this company 2 decades ago, back when the office occupied a different building and half the current executive team was still in college. Back when he'd been someone they invested in, rather than someone they managed around. He grabbed his phone and his notebook, another habit, always have something to write with, and stood. The walk from his desk to Elena Ross's office would take 90 seconds. Nathan had timed it once, during a different crisis in a different year. 90 seconds to cross from the fluorescent-lit practicality of the bullpen to the soft lighting and closed doors of Executive Row. 90 seconds to transition from working professional to summoned subject. 90 seconds to wonder if everything you'd built was about to be dismantled. Rebecca from HR passed him in the hallway. She smiled, the professional kind, trained and empty, and said something inconsequential about the weather. Nathan responded automatically, his mouth forming pleasantries while his mind calculated possibilities. Layoffs, performance review, restructuring, retirement conversation. The list of corporate euphemisms for "you're done here" was longer than most people realized. Elena Ross's assistant, a sharp young woman named Priya who was undoubtedly brilliant at her job and definitely too competent to remain just an assistant for long, looked up as Nathan approached her desk. "She's expecting you," Priya said, and there was something in her voice, sympathy, pity, that made Nathan's stomach tighten. "Thanks," Nathan said, and knocked twice on the frosted glass door even though it stood half open. "Come in, Nathan." Close the door. Elena Ross was 38 years old, which made her 8 years younger than Nathan and the youngest CEO in the company's 43-year history. She'd been appointed 14 months ago in a move the board called visionary and the old guard called reckless in the safety of their private group chats. Nathan had remained carefully neutral on the subject, understanding that expressing opinions about leadership transitions was a reliable way to end up on the wrong side of organizational politics. She stood by the floor-to-ceiling window now, her back to him, looking out over the city that stretched below their 23rd floor vantage point. Seattle in late October, gray skies, the perpetual threat of rain that might or might not materialize, the Space Needle visible in the distance like a relic from more optimistic decades. "Sit down," she said without turning around. "We need to talk." Nathan sat in one of the 2 chairs facing her desk, not at the desk itself, which remained between them like a fortification. but close enough that he could see the carefully curated photos she kept there. Elena at a charity gala. Elena shaking hands with the mayor. Elena receiving an award for innovation in technology solutions. No family photos. No vacation snapshots. Just achievement, documented and displayed. She finally turned to face him, and Nathan was struck, as he often was, by how completely controlled she appeared. Elena Ross didn't fidget. She didn't pace nervously. She didn't fill uncomfortable silences with anxious laughter or unnecessary words. She occupied space with the confidence of someone who'd learned early that hesitation read as weakness. "How long have you been with the company, Nathan?" He knew she knew the answer. This was theater, and they were both playing their assigned parts. 21 years this November. 21 years. She repeated it slowly, as if testing the weight of the words. "You were here before the merger, before the pivot to cloud services, before most of the current executive team was hired." "Yes. You've trained," she glanced at a paper on her desk, "for executives who are now VPs. You've managed crisis interventions that saved the company millions in potential losses. Your client retention rate is 93%. Your team's error margin is the lowest in the operations division." Nathan said nothing. He'd learned long ago that compliments in corporate settings were usually the appetizer before the main course of bad news. Elena sat down behind her desk, steepled her fingers, and looked at him with an expression that was impossible to read. "I'm going to be direct with you because I don't believe in wasting people's time," she said. "Adrian Lockhatch wants you gone." The words landed like stones in still water, not with a splash, but with a heavy, inevitable sink. Adrian Lockhatch, Senior VP of Strategic Initiatives, 42 years old, Harvard MBA, 3 years with the company. All of them spent accumulating influence the way some people collected vintage wines. "I see," Nathan said, and his voice was steadier than he felt. "He's proposed what he's calling a phased transition plan. 6 months. You'd stay on officially to mentor your replacement, transfer institutional knowledge, ensure smooth continuity." "Officially," Nathan repeated. "Officially." Elena leaned back in her chair. "Unofficially, you'd be stripped of decision-making authority week by week. Your team would be reassigned. Your projects would be transferred. By month 3, you'd be a consultant to your own job. By month 6, you'd sign a separation agreement framed as a mutual decision, complete with a modest severance package and a polite press release about your many contributions." Nathan absorbed this with the careful stillness of a man who'd spent years learning not to react visibly to pain. "It would look respectful," Elena continued. "Very civilized. Very professional. No drama, no lawsuits. Just a quiet fade into irrelevance while we bring in someone younger, cheaper, and more aligned with Adrian's vision of operational efficiency." "Why are you telling me this?" It was the only question that mattered. If Elena supported Adrian's plan, Nathan would already be in HR signing papers. If she was warning him, that meant something else was happening, something more complicated. Elena stood again, walked back to the window. The gray light softened her features, made her look younger and more tired than she probably wanted anyone to see. "Because I don't agree with it," she said quietly. "And because I think Adrian is making a mistake that's going to cost this company more than he realizes." "Then why not just say no?" She turned to look at him, and for the first time, Nathan saw something other than control in her expression. He saw calculation, strategy, the kind of chess player thinking that happened 3 moves ahead. Because Adrian has the board's ear. Because he's convinced them that the company needs to refresh its senior talent. Because half the executives see this as a test case. If they can phase you out smoothly, they can do it to anyone who's been here too long. She paused. "And because if I shut him down directly without cause, I look like I'm protecting old guard loyalty over company interests. So you need me to give you cause to keep me?" "No." Elena's voice sharpened. "I need you to decide if you want to fight for your position, or if you're already halfway out the door." The question hung between them like a challenge. Nathan thought about his daughter. 17 years old, senior year of high school, college applications scattered across their kitchen table. Maya, who was learning every day what it meant to be a young woman in spaces that would underestimate her, dismiss her, try to make her small. Maya, who watched everything he did and learned from it. "What would fighting look like?" he asked. Elena pulled a folder from her desk drawer and slid it across to him. Nathan opened it. Inside were printed emails, budget reports, organizational charts. Adrian's plan relies on the appearance of consensus, Elena said. He wants this to look inevitable, natural, just good business. If you make it visible, make it a choice that has to be defended in daylight instead of decided in private conversations, it becomes harder to execute. You want me to force a public discussion? I want you to remind everyone what institutional knowledge actually means. I want you to make the board uncomfortable with the idea of losing you. She sat back down, met his eyes directly. I want you to stop being so goddamn quiet about your own value. Nathan absorbed this. It was a risk, a massive one. If he pushed back publicly and lost, he'd lose everything. The severance, the references, the ability to leave with dignity. He'd become a cautionary tale, that guy who couldn't read the room, who fought a battle that was already lost. But if he didn't fight, Maya would watch her father surrender without trying. She'd learned that when powerful people decided you were inconvenient, the smart thing to do was make yourself smaller, quieter, more compliant. And Nathan had spent 17 years trying to teach her the opposite. I need to think about this, he said. Elena nodded. You have until end of business Thursday. That's when Adrian wants to present his transition plan to the executive committee. She glanced at her computer screen, dismissing him with the gesture. That's all I can give you. Nathan stood, folder in hand. At the door, he paused. Why are you helping me? Elena didn't look up from her screen. Because Adrian's plan isn't about efficiency. It's about control. And because if I let him erase you without a fight, I become complicit in building a company where institutional memory is a liability instead of an asset. She finally met his gaze. Also, your daughter goes to Lincoln High, right? Yes. My niece is in her debate class. Says she's terrifyingly good at argument. Nathan felt something shift in his chest. This wasn't just about corporate strategy. Elena had done her homework. She knew about his life outside these walls. She knew what was at stake. She gets that from her mother, Nathan said quietly. I doubt that. Elena's expression didn't change, but something in her voice softened fractionally. Close the door on your way out. Hashtag part 2, the decision. Nathan didn't go back to his desk. He left the building, walked 3 blocks to a coffee shop he'd never been to before. Important, going somewhere he wouldn't run into colleagues, and ordered a black coffee he didn't drink. He sat by the window and opened the folder Elena had given him. The emails were damning. Not explicitly. Corporate communication was rarely that honest, but in aggregate, they painted a clear picture. Adrian Lawcatch had spent the last 4 months building a coalition. Quiet conversations with board members about succession planning, carefully worded memos about organizational agility, budget proposals that coincidentally recommended restructuring Nathan's department. It was a masterclass in corporate maneuvering. If Nathan had been reading this about someone else's career, he might have even admired the strategy. But this was his life. He pulled out his phone and stared at the home screen photo. Maya at her debate tournament last month, holding a trophy, grinning with the unself-conscious joy of someone who hadn't yet learned to doubt her own competence. His ex-wife Jennifer had taken that photo. They'd been divorced for 9 years, but they'd managed to build something functional from the wreckage, parallel parenting, they called it. Separate lives that converged around their daughter's needs. Jennifer had remarried 3 years ago, moved to Portland with her new husband. Maya had chosen to stay in Seattle with Nathan. Dad gets me, she'd said, like it was the simplest truth in the world. Nathan had spent 9 years trying to deserve that faith. His phone buzzed. A text from Maya. Debate practice running late. Can you pick me up at 6 instead of 5:30? He typed back. No problem. Pizza for dinner? Only if it's not that place with the weird crust. Fine. The good place. You're the best, Red Heart. 3 words, casual, thrown off without thought. But they landed in Nathan's chest like an anchor. He looked back at the emails in the folder, at Adrian Lawcatch's careful dismantling of a career, at Elena Ross's calculated offer of alliance. And he made his decision. That night, after picking up Maya from debate practice and sitting through dinner while she detailed the various ways her AP history teacher was philosophically wrong about the causes of World War I, Nathan waited until she'd retreated to her room before opening his laptop. He drafted an email, deleted it, drafted it again. The final version was 147 words. It requested a full operational review, cross-departmental, transparent, with metrics from the last 5 years. It proposed that before any organizational transitions were discussed, the executive committee should have complete visibility into current operational frameworks, including crisis management protocols, client relationship structures, and institutional knowledge transfer systems. It was professionally worded, completely reasonable, and it would force Adrian's hand. Nathan stared at the draft for 20 minutes. His finger hovered over the send button. This was the point of no return. Once he sent this, there was no pretending he didn't know what was happening. No quiet exit. No maintaining relationships with people who decided he was expendable. He thought about Maya upstairs, doing calculus homework. About the example he was setting. About whether it was better to teach her strategic retreat or defiant clarity. His phone buzzed. Another text from Maya. By the way, there's this girl in my class who keeps talking over me in group projects. What would you do? Nathan smiled grimly and typed his response. Make her acknowledge your ideas in front of everyone. Don't give her the option of pretending you're not there. Savage. I like it, smiling face with horns. Learned it from you. Liar. But okay. Nathan looked back at his laptop screen and pressed send. Hashtag part 3. Old beds. The response was immediate, not in hours or days, but in the texture of silence that followed. Wednesday morning, Nathan arrived at the office to find his meeting with the product development team had been postponed. The regional manager who usually grabbed coffee with him every week sent a terse email about being slammed, and we'll catch up soon. Priya, Elena's assistant, smiled when she saw him in the hallway but didn't stop to chat like she normally did. The office hadn't turned hostile. It had done something worse. It had become carefully neutral. Nathan had been in corporate environments long enough to recognize the signs. People were waiting to see which way the wind blew. His email had created uncertainty, and uncertainty made people cautious. No one wanted to be seen as too close to someone who might be on their way out. At 2:17 p.m., Adrian Lockhatch appeared at Nathan's desk. He was tall. Unnecessarily tall, Nathan had always thought, with the kind of sharp jawline that looked good in corporate headshots and the confidence of someone who'd never had to doubt his own trajectory. He wore his suit jacket even in the casual office environment, a power move disguised as formality. Nathan, Adrian said, his voice warm and entirely empty of warmth. Got your email about the operational review. Interesting timing. Seemed like a good moment for clarity, Nathan replied, not standing up. Another small power move. You don't rise for someone trying to eliminate you. Clarity. Adrian smiled. That's one word for it. Elena's asked me to coordinate with you on the scope. I'm thinking we can keep it focused, efficient. No need to waste executive committee time on every minor operational detail. Translation. Let me control the narrative. I disagree, Nathan said pleasantly. If we're discussing organizational transitions, the committee should have comprehensive data, not just the highlights Adrian Lockhatch wants them to see. Something flickered in Adrian's expression, annoyance, calculation. Of course, he said. We all want what's best for the company. I'm sure we can find a framework that works for everyone. I'm sure we can. They looked at each other for 3 seconds that felt like 30. Then Adrian smiled, the kind that didn't reach anywhere near his eyes, and walked away. Nathan watched him go and felt the weight of what he'd just done settle fully into his bones. He'd declared war. Politely, professionally, but war nonetheless. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Well played. Now don't lose your nerve. ER. Elena Ross. Watching, evaluating. Nathan deleted the text and went back to work. He had a review to prepare, and he'd be damned if he was going to let Adrian Lockhatch control a single word of it. The next 48 hours were a masterclass in corporate warfare disguised as professional courtesy. Adrian scheduled a coordination meeting for Thursday at 8 a.m., early enough to be inconvenient, late enough that Nathan couldn't claim he hadn't had time to prepare. When Nathan arrived, he found not just Adrian, but 2 other VPs, Marcus Chin from Finance and Diane Rees from Human Resources. The message was clear. This isn't just Adrian. This is institutional. Thanks for making time, Adrian said, gesturing to the empty chair as if Nathan were a guest in a room that was technically as much his domain as anyone's. We wanted to align on the operational review before it goes to the executive committee. Align, Nathan repeated. Interesting word choice. Diane Reeves shifted in her seat. She was in her early 50s, had been with the company almost as long as Nathan, and had perfected the art of HR speak. saying everything while committing to nothing. We want to make sure everyone's on the same page, she said carefully. The review should be productive, constructive, not inflammatory, Marcus added. He was younger than Nathan by a decade, hungry in the way corporate climbers always were. We don't want to create unnecessary alarm. Nathan set his notebook on the table, pulled out a pen, and looked at each of them in turn. Let me make sure I understand, he said. You want an operational review that discusses potential organizational transitions without actually alarming anyone about what those transitions might mean. Silence. That's not what we're saying, Adrian finally replied, but his tone said otherwise. Then what are you saying? We're saying there's a way to present institutional knowledge transfer that emphasizes opportunity rather than loss. Adrian leaned forward, his expression earnest in the way skilled liars often mastered. This isn't about you, Nathan. It's about building a sustainable future for the company. You have to see that. And there it was. The architecture of erasure laid out in professional language. This isn't about you. Except it was entirely about him. Sustainable future. As if his 21 years of preventing disasters were somehow unsustainable. You have to see that. Translation, accept this quietly, or prove you're the problem. Nathan had a choice in this moment. He could nod, agree, let them shape the narrative into something palatable. Make this easy for everyone, including himself. Or he could do what his daughter would do when someone tried to talk over her in class. He could make them acknowledge him. I see exactly what this is, Nathan said, his voice level and clear. This is a carefully orchestrated plan to remove me from a position I've held successfully for 2 decades because Adrian has convinced you all that institutional memory is a liability instead of an asset. Diane's eyes widened fractionally. Marcus looked at Adrian. Adrian's jaw tightened. That's not. Adrian started. I'm not finished. Nathan didn't raise his voice. Didn't need to. The operational review will include comprehensive data on crisis interventions, client retention strategies, and the specific ways institutional knowledge has prevented costly mistakes. It will document every instance where experience and judgment saved this company from decisions that looked good on paper but would have failed in execution. Nathan, Diane said, her HR voice activating like a defense system, I don't think anyone's questioning your contributions. Then why are we having this conversation? The question landed like a slap. Marcus cleared his throat. The company has to evolve. You understand that. Sometimes evolution means making difficult choices about structure and personnel. Evolution, Nathan said. Is that what we're calling it? What would you call it? Adrian's voice had gone cold. Convenience. You want to bring in someone who doesn't remember the last 3 times we almost made catastrophic decisions that experience prevented. Someone who won't push back when you propose something that sounds innovative but is actually just expensive and dangerous. Nathan stood. The review happens my way, with full transparency, or I copy Elena on every email in this room, and we have this conversation at the executive committee level without your pre-negotiated framing. He walked to the door, then paused. And Adrian, next time you want to manage me out, try doing it without pretending it's for my own good. At least have the courage to admit what you're doing. Nathan left before any of them could respond. His hands were shaking. His heart was racing. But he'd done it. He'd made himself visible. By Friday afternoon, the entire office knew something was happening. Not the details. Corporate drama rarely leaked in specifics. But the energy had shifted. People noticed when Nathan walked into rooms. Conversations paused. Glances were exchanged. Nathan ignored it all and focused on building his review. He pulled reports from the last 5 years. He documented every crisis he'd managed, every client he'd saved, every junior employee he'd trained who'd gone on to leadership positions. He built a case not just for his value, but for the cost of institutional amnesia. It was meticulous, comprehensive, and damning to Adrian's narrative of natural transition. At 4:47 p.m., his phone rang. Elena, my office. Now, when Nathan arrived, Elena was standing by her window again, her thinking position, apparently. She didn't turn when he entered. You've made this complicated, she said. I thought that was the point. Complicated for Adrian, yes. But also for me. She finally faced him. The board isn't happy. They don't like uncertainty. They don't like internal conflict becoming visible. Then maybe they shouldn't have approved a plan to quietly eliminate experienced leadership. They didn't approve anything. That's the problem. Elena sat on the edge of her desk, casual, but Nathan could see the calculation in her posture. Adrian was counting on consensus without documentation. You forced documentation. And now I have to defend keeping you without looking like I'm being sentimental about loyalty. She pulled a paper from her desk. Your review request has been approved. Monday morning, full committee. You'll have 90 minutes to present. 90 minutes. Against Adrian's 30-minute transition proposal. Elena's expression was unreadable. This is your chance, Nathan. But it's also your risk. If you can't prove your value in that room, with numbers and outcomes they can't dispute, Adrian wins. And you'll leave with nothing. Nathan absorbed this. What about you? Where will you stand? Where I can be most useful. Elena stood. I'm not going to defend you emotionally. I'm not going to make this about fairness or loyalty. If you want to win, you need to make them understand that losing you costs more than keeping you. Make it about money, about risk, about the things boards actually care about. She said it without cynicism. Just fact. People are replaceable. In their minds, everyone is replaceable. You need to prove that replacing you is stupidly expensive. Nathan looked at her. This young CEO who'd risen so fast, who'd learned so early that sentiment was weakness in corporate mathematics. Did someone teach you that? He asked quietly. Or did you figure it out yourself? Something flickered across Elena's face. Not quite vulnerability, but close. My first executive position, I tried to save someone's job because they were good at what they did. Experienced. Reliable. Her voice was flat, recounting fact. The board removed them anyway and made it clear that my judgment was impaired by emotional thinking. I learned that day that if you want to protect people, you have to speak the language of profit. That's a depressing lesson. That's surviving corporate leadership while female and under 40. Elena walked to the door, opened it. Dismissal. Monday, Nathan. Make them care about keeping you for the right reasons. Or lose for the wrong ones. ## Part 4. Building the case. Nathan left Elena's office and walked back through the now quiet hallways. Friday evening. Most people had already left. The bullpen was empty except for a few dedicated souls finishing projects or pretending to be busy. He sat at his desk and looked at the stack of reports he'd compiled. 21 years of work, distilled into data points and crisis management case studies. This was what it came down to. Not relationships. Not loyalty. Not the hundreds of small moments where he'd trained someone, prevented a mistake, saved a client relationship. Just numbers that proved his deletion would be expensive. He pulled out his phone and texted Maya, working late. Order pizza if you want. I'll be home by 8. Her response was immediate. Everything okay? Yeah, just work stuff? Liar. But okay. Save me a slice if you eat first. Nathan smiled despite everything. His daughter knew him too well. He turned back to his computer and kept building his defense. Because Monday morning, he would walk into that boardroom and make them see him. Not as a problem to be managed, but as a cost they couldn't afford. Continuing in next response due to length. Would you like me to continue with the complete 20,000-word version? I can expand the remaining sections with more detail about the weekend preparation, Maya's perspective, the board meeting, the aftermath, and the mentorship journey with Sarah and David.